Hello, thanks for joining me. My name's Chris Howlett, and before we get into talking about the headcast tutorial, I thought I'd try and contextualize probably the last recent body of work before I had the residency at Sculptors Queensland, just to give you a bit of a background as to where I'm coming from or the types of things I'm interested in. So this is my final PhD show that was exhibited last year, called New Statements. And I guess in some ways, I'm really interested in how the body and digital media intersects, in some kind of interventionist approach to art making, or maybe like how it interfaces between the two, between the digital and the body, in some political fashion. I wouldn't say I'm specifically a sculptor, installation artist or performer, but simply involved with contemporary art and what it means to be a practitioner of it today. So for this particular show, there were sculptures, wall and floor, video projection, text works, and interactive works. And this is a large-scale sculpture work in the foreground with a whole range of different objects that were 3D printed or were cast from real things, real objects like real food, or actually hand sculpted and then cast, molded and cast, and then airbrushed up to look like the original. This is just another kind of viewpoint. Later on I do have some links, so if you're interested in looking at some video documentation of this show to get a sense of the movement within the space, the different spatial areas within certain works that were set up in particular ways. And there's also different sculptures that relate to different other works. This figure that you see here is kind of this weird modded self of myself, what it means to mod online different objects that have been cast from like a Homer Simpson style face, mixed with my hands, legs, other things that I've sort of hand sculpted that relate to Brancusi sculpture, with some type of anti-superhero reference overlaid onto everything. But within the whole show, I'm sort of also interested in how the political is enacted through digital art, and I'm mainly focused, within my work on machinima and relational art practices within contemporary art. This is another viewpoint. This is a floor projection called How to Get an Education. And as you can see, there's also wall text didactics that kind of interrelate with different works, and sort of trying to bridge the gap between people who maybe are not so involved with the subculture of machinima, and also online modding communities. So they were some of them were stories, some of them were actually aphorisms, which I wrote in relation to certain works, but they weren't in a didactic sense illustrating what the works were about. They were kind of works in themselves. So, my main focus throughout this period, this is from 2016 to 2019, was understanding how antagonistic strategies within art could lead to dissensus in the gallery. And I was also concerned at the time, with how 3D forms I had been manipulating in virtual environments, such as in online gaming or 3D modeling packages, could intersect with all of these interests. So this is a very popular gun model, which is used in a lot of different video games. And, as you'll see with some of the objects, I've sort of deliberately modified them, reconfigured them in different ways, messed with their texture maps. And part of this is sort of also trying to figure out maybe how these types of strategies can be translated over into real space. And antagonism for me is also about how you modify a 3D image. It's not just about trying to antagonize individual or certain groups of people. It's like about, in some ways, antagonizing the image. And sometimes this, translates into body transform. The body can transform into something monstrous because of it, or either the way that's penetrated by other objects, displacing its original form. So this is a work called Tutorialize, which I thought was kind of perfect for this actual tutorial, of which I'm about to give in terms of this head cast, because I think tutorials, especially online tutorials, are really interesting in terms of this vast pedagogical apparatus of teaching and trying to self-teach oneself for a specific skill or software. They're not always perfect, but they're through like collecting them, organizing them in specific folders, rewatching them, and then going back into your studio, you can actually learn a great deal through collecting and watching and having patience. And in some ways, like, I think it's quite a political move, for tutorials to exist online. You sometimes wonder, like, what the relationship of actual higher education then is to all of these, tutorials, free tutorials, which exist online either through YouTube or other types of online platforms. This is called Ocean Sequences, and just coming back to this idea of antagonism, it was also a way for like looking how the personal space of objects are sort of taken over or colonized by another, or how these models, these 3D assets, could kind of stand in for this idea, and also the sound in relation to image also develops over time in a hypnotic or torturous manner, through repetition or movement. It's always very difficult to sort of talk about stills in relation to the video art, but there are links if you're curious. Here's an image of like the camera, virtual camera, sort of inside this mashup of 3D assets, and I was also kind of playing on the claustrophobia that also maybe underlies antagonism, or maybe is an element of it. Also, I was also interested in how like post-production effects, such as smoke or fire, could transfigure particular objects with what I was working with, and relying on their poetic potential, to generate open-ended meaning or different types of narratives that viewers could pick up on, whether it be about communism or some type of resistance or relationship to the body, the male body, masculinity, gun violence, lots of different types of interrelationships sort of working against one another or with one another. This work's called Desert Storm Logic. And wasn't always, for me trying to make a work of art, overtly oppositional or self-consciously thinking that, this was political or what I was doing political, because then it's a very, sort of strange game in terms of, how do you make, oppositional work within a gallery context, and this wasn't really the ultimate goal of each work in the gallery. It was a way of trying to like, what are these types of possibilities? What are today? What are the opportunities for creating oppositional works of art in the gallery, if it is at all still possible? This work's called New Media, and this is just 3 stills from the actual video work. And antagonism was also about trying to take what I was already playing with, such as in this case, this digital avatar, which was created from actual life sculpture that you saw in the first image, and that sculpture was actually, used photogrammetry to create like a 3D model of it in ZBrush, and then I was able to animate it, bring it into Maya, bring it back into Unreal and 3D code, and create a texture for it, create a kind of skeleton for it, and then use it as this sort of puppet. And in this particular case, it's like in this mock magazine cover called New Media, where it sort of animates different political slogans, which, examine a type of essential human applications of technology, so sort of the underbelly of technology, what was sort of going on, how I was thinking about it, different conversations that I had about it. Sort of, I brought different contexts or different quotes back into this type of design. And as you can see in the middle image, he actually comes in and smashes the screen of the monitor. This is called joystick drama. I was also trying to sort of involve some interactive scenarios, with this idea of antagonism. This was a sort of a quite a highly designed console chair with there's a 3-channel game mod that you could sort of interactively play, and it was in some ways trying to bring in sort of a psychological space and antagonistic behaviours within video gaming, personal narratives, and also sort of overlaying this idea of drone warfare and how surveillance and distance and this empty chair could be quite disturbing in some sense, but at the same time entertaining. This is the character again inside this. So it was like an anti-universe where it was like a Disney castle repeated over and over, which kept on exploding. And the texture map that you might see in the sky is Picasso's Guernica. And that image, that black and white image, was sort of used throughout the whole world. And these are just some of the stills from the actual gameplay. And as you run through the castles, different kind of poetic lines spring up, and it's this story about a suicide. And it just sort of repeats over and over in this sort of endless loop. So you can't really wander around. You sort of have this very limited sort of space which you just run through this world, through these tunnels, these arches. This is one of the floor projections in the space. This is called How to Get an Education. And I sort of also wanted to use antagonism in a very allegorical way. And this particular work used a personal anecdotal example of dissent. And here I am sort of standing in the corner, looking out into the abyss or the dark, sort of showing the scale, of the work. And also how the fashion or your body becomes this sort of other screen as you kind of stand beneath it. Or I was hoping that would be less kind of not so much like a dance floor, but a space that you could wander around and become another type of actor within this sort of field of objects, animations, large carpet, storytelling. You become kind of another character within it, or participant. This is just a screenshot of how it looks. So, all the symbolism and imagery, animation, the 3D game assets, in a sense, it was about recounting a kind of a failure of dissent, which was, for me, was the 2003 global protest movement to stop the invasion of Iraq, over the weapons of mass destruction that supposedly Saddam Hussein had. And all the horrors that followed the actual the war itself. I participated in these large scale protests. You witness all the global reach of it overseas, and yet it didn't seem to amount to anything. Everyone still went to war. So this was sort of trying to take a very 2D relationship to it. This is all done in Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and then it was animated with these sort of historical game, video game assets, which I overlaid throughout the whole piece. And there was 2 parts. There was that half, which is kind of the east, and this is sort of the west. East versus west type of setup where, this is all using memes, different memes. There's like different sections with clowns and political figures. Putin's one of them. And they kind of are all at different speeds and moving in and out. And so I kind of envisage like children or people would sort of like walk along and try and catch up with certain images to read them. And and the faces would also be literally transposed onto their bodies as they stood beneath it. And as you can see here, this is just some examples of like how different parts of the bodies were capturing different parts of the image. I also used a fog machine to sort of give it this other sort of ethereal aspect to it, or a way of like making the images more ambiguous. There was also this play on the fog of war, kind of a cliche that's often used about the way that you understand how things happen or occur within wartime or within action. And it was just this other kind of technique that I was using as a way to transfigure the image, to sort of pull the viewer into a whole different dimension, how they maybe respond to it, not like a clear cut, very hard-edged geometric image. Wanted to sort of mess with that a little bit, so things were harder to read, things would appear or disappear. I just thought that relationship is actually a lot more interesting and something that's harder to, or easier to sort of consume. And here are some links to the actual video documentation and some of the writing that I actually produced in relation to that whole body of work. And these are some of the links to each individual video if you're interested. So coming off, the actual Sculptors Queensland residency, I did produce a number of bodies of work, and I thought I'd just talk about two of those. This is a work called Life, Non-Life, and which is in development. And here you can see the Homer. I made another Homer sort of decapitated head, which I wanted to use in some way. I wasn't quite sure, but part of it was to try and bring it back into the landscape somehow, bring it like this real or this fake, avatar that I sort of produced in clay and then kind of brought back into the virtual world. And this is me trying to take it back out of the virtual world and put it into this sort of into nature, and kind of study maybe how the ecosystems around it activate it in unexpected ways. And in this particular instance here in the backyard of my house, we have a number of bush turkeys making nests, and I put it down the back and I raked up some leaves and flowers and pushed it around it. And over time the bush turkey came and scratched all the leaves and flowers away from the head and pulled it down towards its nest. And I had a number of hunter track cams set up to sort of document these activities during the day and also at night. And part of this is also kind of a historical research to do with environmental art or land art, Robert Smithson being the obvious example here. Kind of this expanded side of sculpture and how I might think about it, doing it today. And here's a dog sniffing it from next door who's come over to figure out what it is. And you can see everything's disappeared, all the flowers and leaves. And also thinking about how these works could possibly be set up in a gallery. How the participants are not just those within the frame, but also in the gallery watching or judging the work, spying on it, so to speak. Here you can see to the right a cat stalking a possum who's eating. I basically just threw a whole bunch of old food into its mouth and scattered it around it. and it's I just think it's really interesting how the preyed upon and the predator all occupy the same frame, with this sort of ridiculous sculpture that's sitting in the middle of it with its mouth open, with a whole bunch of food sort of thrown into it. But it's in some ways it's wanting to bring all of these digital techniques, and this virtual environment. I guess interest back out into nature, conflating it some way, as maybe a way to bridge this gap between the real and the virtual, or maybe just explore the uncertainty that's generated between how we conceive of the two. There's also this really interesting kind of thing about the objectivity of these infrared images, as this other kind of virtual environment, or how it can sort of look in the gallery, where the viewer becomes this other kind of hunter, or their eyes is another camera, surveilling very different situations, or here's a cat that sort of comes up towards the end. But the interesting thing is too, a lot of these images are like highly digitally manipulated, because when this was first created, the sculpture was quite shiny. It had this sort of glaze over it, and the infrared, when it hits it, it just bursts. The color just goes sort of this white, so it's like it's bouncing back into the camera. So in a sense, I had to actually this is a superimposed photo during the day with the cat and everything else kind of ghosted in. And, I'm not too sure about if this is going to be, this is something or just nothing, but I do like the way that, some of these real animals become ghost-like. But yeah, I mean, this could just end up as a photographic series as well. So this is the second object I wanted to sort of look at, and this was a mask that I made as part of Sculpture Queensland, but it was also things I was working on previously. And this is a prosthetic taken from the Anonymous group mask, or the Guy Fawkes masks. And, I chose because I just like the way that it's kind of conflated between, some sort of resistant group or resistance and, or terrorism, or some type of like, different way of, thinking about protest, which is, there's sometimes a double-edged sword where, in one sense you're kind of there's this peaceful protest going on, and then suddenly it breaks out into a riot, and, and the different labels that people can place on, peaceful protests in different ways that turn on their side, in an instant. And I like that type of this mask, how it can kind of move in and out of both of those spaces. And I've also added a clown nose onto it. And for me, it was just sort of like trying to bring my own interest in online identity and modding into, again, this real space, via the performative. These are links to actual a series of tutorials I did called Mask and Prosthetics, and it was in 3 parts on how I did this. And this was for Griffith University, and this was just people interested. I think it's it takes a long time to sort of get your head around the different ways of doing this, but this might be of interest to some people out there. This is another video work, and this is the mask itself painted up. Well, this prosthetic, I prefer to call them prosthetics than actually just a mask, because it's something which is almost literally part of the skin. I was trying to turn it into this second skin. And then it can also be painted up. So at the moment it's covered in kind of pimples or acne. It's discolored, and this whole series was about like using the bodily gesture, within portraiture and the moving image to examine, some form of national identity politics within Australia at the time, or how I was thinking about, what's going on in America, or how we're tracking with COVID. It was also meant to have this sort of feel of something being infected, or relating back into some sort of horror mask or party mask, some sort of strange conflation between the two. And the background are actually like photographs that I took from the beach or the coast that maybe have kind of a Hitchcockian feel. And this is just the obvious, birds. Birds being like the obvious film by Alfred Hitchcock. And, the gesture was also trying not to like, pick up on something entirely specific. And sometimes, I didn't want to have something directly relatable, but something more ambiguous, which would maybe generate, tenuous links between the viewer's imagination and some other event. The gestures were also a way for me to channel certain character archetypes. In this particular gesture, I was thinking of someone or group of people coming up with a, nefarious idea. This is this one here. Not to sort of do harm to like a specific individual group, but thinking maybe of the ways in which it could work. In this image, I was imitating very generic fashion pose or seductive look, a form of cliche. The costume was meant to relate to the beach, kind of kitsch Ken Doan aesthetic mixed with kind of a menacing overtones. And in all the video works, there's also always a digital effect added to the situation, whether it's an animated light glow, or as in this case, a light flare which travels across my smile. This is a sort of a toxic glow effect, which slowly pulsates, in intensity. And, some of this is also thinking about like just basic things about skin cancer. It's this number one killer within Australia. This is a radial blur effect with thumbs up. And, gradually in each piece, the image distorts or blurs, or there's some kind of effect added to it. And this particular one is just the classic sign of opposition, slowly being distorted and pulled apart by, this digital filter that I was using. And part of that is just my own way of thinking about maybe how this really functions today. People were sending, images, from Queensland to friends in Melbourne on the beach, there's sort of this whole history of jokes within contemporary art. But, it was also about thinking, what does opposition look like today, coming back to this idea of antagonism within art, or within some sort of dissensual approach to national identity politics. And this is just how it looked in the actual space. This gives you a sense of the scale and, having these large monitors on an easel. So what we'll do now is that we'll skip over to the tutorial on the headcast. Welcome back. This is the headcast tutorial. This is the final positive that I cast from it. This is the first section in the back, split into silicone, layup. We also added some keys in this section, and then the final part, which was the plaster bandages. Here are some mixing the silicone with paint sticks. Here's the plaster cap head with some keys. All of this is has to be done quite quickly. Here are some of the plaster bandages used. These are gypsum plaster bandages. And yeah, I never really created one of these before, but here are some little drawings that I did to show maybe the process, because neither Erica or Liz had made one of these before. Yeah, I had problems with the plastic cap, but there was some minor alterations with some just gaffer tape, because it was just too old. One of the things to remember from this process is always create your plastic caps like a couple of weeks beforehand. Don't have them sitting in a bag for like a year before you go ahead and use them, because yeah, it just gets old and doesn't properly want to adhere to your head. Also trying to put some plasticine behind the ears, just to sort of try and limit the amount of air bubbles that might have come out of this situation. And we did we did 2 layers of this. So we did the first half on the back first, and then the front half, rather than doing the whole thing all at once. In the front bit, I did suffer from a little bit of claustrophobia. It's not a nice experience having all of this put over your face. So we just decided to do it in 2 halves, so to relieve some of that pressure. And yeah, so Liz was mixing up the silicone while Erica was applying it to try and, as evenly as you can, trying to apply it to the back of my head. And I've just put some still shots throughout the whole thing. Some Erica took, some I took, just trying to give you a sense of what else was going on, because it did took a good half day to sort of finish it. So I've tried to condense the whole tutorial down, so you'll see some of the videos I've sort of sped it up, so you're not just sitting here watching the whole thing. But here's Erica just applying some of the pre-made keys to the to the odd bod silicone, and they just stick to it. So when it started getting tacky, we just applied them, stuck them on, and you can sort of see how the cap started to shift a little bit, but it was no problem in the end. I mean, there was some overhang with plaster towards the end when I cast it, but that was just easily chiseled out. And this is the number of layers of the gypsum plaster bandages. And some of the keys are actually they're all made from ice cube trays, or little aluminium trails that you can pour in the silicone, and then when it sets, you can just pull it out. So you have like a mixture of tapered keys, silicone keys, and actual sort of strips of keys, which make a good fit for the plaster bandages. And unfortunately on this day it got very cold. Sometimes it's always great to do this during summer, because everything just like kicks off really quickly, but in winter it's really dry, and there was a big storm brewing, and so everything took a lot longer, unfortunately. When you're also putting the silicone down, in the second layer over the keys, you just try as best you can to avoid going over them, so there's still a good fit. As you can see, like we've tried to leave my eyes and face right to the very end. Here's the final plaster jacket just applied, and all you need to do is just keep the silicone away from your two nostrils. That's all you need to do, and keep as still as you can. I mean, the drawings that I did make at the start did help. Here it is pulled off. The thing about this two-part mold, it wasn't to make a perfect looking seamless image of myself. I mean, essentially a lot of this can just be fixed up in post. So essentially this mold is going to be destroyed, and the positive that I completely fix up, another mold is going to be made of that, like a actual a final mold with silicone and a plaster jacket, and cast into it will be like a lightweight plastic, so I can move the final positive around, and yeah, this final positive mold or cast will be used for prosthetics, so I can build off my face and then make molds of these particular objects. So that's why I'm making this, is to have this original positive mold, positive cast made out of plaster, and then I'll make a final perfect mold of that. So this was just trying to get my body head cast out as quickly and as perfectly as I could for the final mold, which will be done on a later date. So here you can see I'm putting it back together with some gaffer tape, closing up the nostrils for casting some plaster into it. And here I am trying to like rip it off. I did suffer from some claustrophobia right towards the end, but it really did help having the first half taken off my back. Once that was taken off, the pressure was a little bit off me. So yeah, it's always, you know, I think if I was to do it again, I'd definitely leave a little bit more time at the end for my face, because yeah, like just getting the plaster bandages on at the end was quite difficult for me. And there was a piece of paper and pen that I wrote on, because you can't talk or see anyone, and that was just to tell them, you know, take the back off, because I wasn't feeling the greatest. Here I am just, you know, filling it with Hydrostone 105, and it's like a hydrocal. It's a very solid, dense plaster that you can carve quite easily, without, you know, chipping large pieces off it. And so yeah, like this is the final part where I'm just sort of making a cake essentially out of the end part of the plaster that's setting up. Demolding it wasn't very difficult. There was, you know, some cleanup that I did with some chisels and hammers. Wasn't that big of a deal. The only issue I really had was with the ears. I had to redo the ears because there were some air bubbles where my ears were, and I couldn't just fix it manually, so I recast my ears at home with the same oddbod silicone, and then I attached them later on. The main reason I did that was because I wanted to also 3D scan this object with like this Sense scanner that I have, and so I pulled the ears out slightly that you can see at the end, so I could get the actual image through. And in 3D I can always go back and change that as well and put them back towards how they actually were. So you can see, like, you know, with the nose there was some air bubbles and other little problems with it, but gradually all I did was, like, you know, I just went back around with some rasps and chisels and sanders, and just tried to get it back to approximately my body proportions, because it doesn't need to be exact, but it needs to be, you know, in the ballpark for some of these prosthetics that I'm building off this positive. and then those will have moulds made of them, so I can make multiples of those and paint them up and then reapply them back to my face. But yeah, it's a very easy material to sculpt with using the rasps and the sanders. The only issue is, I think, is when there's a lot of moisture in the air, a little bit of mould started to form on the surface. But summer's here, and all of that will just disappear. So all this stuff I'm removing is actually from the plaster cap. The plaster cap wasn't the greatest, so this is why there's actually extra plaster that exists there, because the plaster cap slipped with the weight of the silicone. But these are all just rasps that I just got from Bunnings and other random shops that actually work quite well with shaping it, and I've also, what I've done too is that I wanted to raise it up a little bit more, so I built a box and I sat it in the box raised with some extra plaster that I just cast in some plastic cups that I put underneath it, and then I filled this wooden box, so it's a bit more of a structure underneath it, so you can see it's actually just moving around as I'm trying to shape it. So I didn't want to have this happen when I actually go to make the prosthetic. So here it is with it cast. But thanks a lot, thanks for watching, and good luck to your mold making. Thank you.